Good morning, everyone. My talk will focus on different models of relief with of pandemic relief with a specific focus on direct transfers to individuals and households. In the first part of the presentation, I'm going to talk briefly about the COVID-19 relief measures that have been passed by Congress so far. In the second part, I will focus on relief measures at the scale of state and city governments. And in the third part, I will focus on the role of nonprofits who have played an important role in getting relief into the hands of individuals. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on pandemic relief measures in California at select cities in Los Angeles and Orange County. In the latest COVID relief bill passed by Congress, there are three provisions that pertain to individuals and households. First, a $600 relief check per person compared to the $1,200 provided by the CARES Act. Second, a $300 unemployment benefit in addition to regular unemployment from states. This is again lower than the $600 unemployment insurance under CARES Act. And third, there is funding allocations to state governments, which will then be redirected towards housing relief. The federal relief bill still excludes undocumented persons, just like the CARES Act did. And relief is also being sent through the same methods of payment as the CARES Act, through EIP debit cards, paper checks, and direct deposits. Issues around processing delays and reaching those without bank accounts are pertinent here. And the report that we circulate later has more details on this. In addition to this past week, California Governor Newsom has announced that there will be a $600 relief check at the California level, in addition to the $600 in federal relief. This is specifically targeted towards low-income residents. Next, I move to the actual mechanisms by which CARES funds and the state and city level funds for pandemic relief are being distributed to people. The three areas of relief I'll discuss are rental relief, unemployment benefits, and undocumented persons relief. Rental relief in California has taken the form of direct transfer of rents to landlords through city rental relief programs, coordinated either by the city itself or through charities and nonprofits that transfer money to landlords. One example of this is the LA Emergency Renters Relief Program that provided $1,000 per month as rent subsidy funded by CARES Act and by private donations. One story that might help us understand how LA's renters relief worked in practice is this one that you see on the screen. One LA resident, Cheyenne Lovings, and her fiance had been paying $1,000 rent for a one-room apartment where they lived with two kids. Their work hours were cut back due to the pandemic, and they struggled to make rent. Though LA's eviction moratorium was in place in June, their landlord evicted them and they became homeless. Without a prospect of a job, making rent or finding a new place was impossible. So when LA County began taking calls for emergency rental relief, she was one among 4,800 people who called on the first day alone. Though the relief program was designed to reach low-income individuals, she is no longer eligible for relief because she was not renting anywhere. She described her situation as being stuck between a rock and a hard place. For this reason, future relief payments should be unconditional and in the form of recurring grants without exclusionary conditions of eligibility. The second area of relief that is important as people lose jobs due to the pandemic is unemployment benefits. Until July 2020, the CARES Act provided $600 in federal pandemic unemployment compensation. California then passed a 20-week extension post-July. Following that, there was the Federal Lost Wages Assistance Program, LWA, which stipulated that states like California share costs of a $400 unemployment benefit. But according to one report, the LWA also excluded about 1.9 million people due to its exclusionary eligibility criteria. Much of the story about how unemployment relief has worked in practice has to do with delays in processing of benefits by California's Employment Development Department, EDD. In one case in Sacramento, for instance, a self-employed caretaker, Holguin, and her boyfriend, Rap, who had been doing lawn care, lost their jobs in March. They couldn't afford rent and were forced to start living out of an RV. Given the massive backlog at the EDD, Rap's unemployment claim hadn't yet been processed. Holguin was saving hers up to get access to water and electricity. Unfortunately, her account was suspended suddenly. Like many others in the state, she spent months trying to contact the EDD. When she finally reached them, she was asked to then contact Bank of America instead to unfreeze her account and access the $800 that she had. She spent weeks trying to upload new documents, getting verification to go through, all while staying in her RV that broke down in a Costco parking lot. In terms of future relief, then, timely unemployment relief is urgent and diverse modes of accessing it is necessary. For example, in California, there have been proposals to expand beyond EDD debit cards that are tied to Bank of America. The third area of relief that is of particular importance in California is undocumented persons relief. The CARES Act and the new relief bill exclude undocumented persons from qualifying for pandemic relief. In California, the COVID-19 Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants, DRAI, funded one-time payments of about $500 per adult. These relief measures were delivered by nonprofits, which were selected by the California state government. And selected persons received relief in the form of cards given to them in person or through mail. Though this program covered over 1 million people, the $500 was simply not enough. Next, I move to the role of nonprofits in delivering relief. Project Roomkey is one example of a public-private partnership that was designed to deliver relief. Project Roomkey was funded partly by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the California state government. It involved coordination between state, county officials, and homeless shelters and nonprofits to place homeless people in vacant hotel rooms. Though beset by problems, the program helped to find non-congregate shelter for 4,000 homeless persons at hotel rooms. Angelino cards are another example of public-private partnership models. Angelino cards took the form of no-fee debit cards issued by MasterCard. They provided locally administered direct cash assistance to families that were living below the poverty line before the pandemic, or those who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. Importantly, it addressed the gaps in federal funding, which excluded undocumented persons. This was run through the LA Mayor's Fund, a nonprofit. They were funded through private donations and involved close coordination between the Mayor's Fund, Accelerator for America, MasterCard's City Possible program, and a fintech partner. Though this was largely successful in delivering relief, one thing to flag from a payments perspective is that though these are no-fee debit cards, it does raise questions about data privacy, since MasterCard will have access to transaction data. The third type of public-private partnership model could be mutual aid models. Mutual aid is a community-centered model of relief, which aims to address the needs of individuals in a community during times of crisis. It uses simple tools like a publicly shared spreadsheet to crowdsource resources. Such aid addresses varied needs, such as food expenses for one meal to rent for an entire month, ranging anywhere between $50 to $500. And these are delivered in the form of cash, payments sent through apps, groceries, or food delivery, etc. So I'm just going to briefly summarize based on all of the models that we've discussed so far. To summarize, the pandemic relief could have been organized in two ways. One, direct financial support without later repayment, or temporary relief from financial obligations. Unfortunately, the CARES Act and the latest relief bill takes the latter approach to relief based on the assumption that people will be able to get back to their pre-pandemic levels of income and pay back their loans and credit. However, this may not be the case as families undergo financial stress for an extended period of time during the pandemic. As we've discussed so far, relief has also been designed and implemented in ways that have excluded people. In total, the CARES Act is estimated to have excluded about 30 million individuals. So then for future relief, to reduce barriers to access pandemic relief, here are a few ideas that we recommend. And the report has a lot more details on this. First, unconditional recurring relief payments is an urgent need. Future relief payments should be in the form of grants rather than loans or credit. There is an urgent need for education, outreach, and assistance on eligibility for relief. Community organizations have an important role to play here in helping people file claims and pointing them to resources that they may be eligible for. Third, diverse forms of relief disbursement will help address inequities in how people access relief. Cash transfers and local infrastructures, such as postal offices, can provide easy and quick relief payments, especially for those already vulnerable to economic shocks. Fourth, financial literacy and coaching can help individuals make financial decisions with scarce resources. Identifying how to prioritize and spend income and relief payments may be crucial in addressing long-term debt. And fifth, leveraging mutual aid and microfinance for relief delivery may be essential as existing institutional mechanisms are slow. Rather than wait for funding allocations to come through, local governments could mobilize mutual aid to begin identifying the needs of the community and matching available and future resources. I'll stop there, and here is the link to the full report, which discusses many of these in detail. Thank you.